What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the 13th Disciple, and I've got an exciting video ahead for you guys. What we talked about today is some really controversial topics. I sat down with my mentor because I honestly couldn't tackle these topics alone, and I guarantee one of these topics, if not all of them, is going to pique your interest. We got anything ranging from why do people go to hell, why doesn't God save everybody if he's so loving, to why the church and the LGBT community don't get along. If you want to see those topics, you have to stick around. Guys, make sure to be active in the conversation. There's a comment section below. Be active. Give your answers to the questions that are coming across. Maybe you have a complaint about how Christians treat people. Maybe you think God should send everyone to heaven. Make sure to give me your opinion. I would love to respond to it. What's going on, guys? I got my mentor, friend here, Tom Fulton. He's going to talk to us about some controversial questions, some deep things that we may not all have a good understanding about. So I needed someone wiser because I wasn't about it. So, Fulton, first question.
Yes.
If a baby dies, do they go to heaven or hell?
Well, you can look at this a couple different ways. The Bible says the only way to be saved is through Christ. So initially, the easy answer is, well, babies must go to hell then because they haven't accepted Christ. But in the Bible, there's some precedent here for what happens to babies. So we look at 2 Samuel. David has a baby with Bathsheba that gets sick, and he's like pleading with God, save my baby, save my baby. And the baby dies, and then he just like goes and eats and is happy, and everybody's scratching their head going, what the heck, David? It's like, well, I can't make him come back, so I'm going to see him again. And so the basic you pull out of that is David is saying, like, my baby is going to be in heaven. And that's kind of reiterated later when his adult son dies, and David is in mourning because he's like, I don't know what my adult son's future is. Most theologians agree babies go to heaven.
That's comforting to hear that,
Yeah.
Babies go to heaven.
We hope.
We hope.
It smells like dog in here.
So, how about the mentally incapable, maybe special needs, cerebral palsy, autism, anything in that spectrum?
Yeah. Yeah, so basically the idea of like, does someone have the mental capacity? Now you're getting into, are we predestined, or is there a human response required? Because now if I'm in a mental state where I'm incapable to have that human response, where does that put me? I kind of rest in God can show mercy to who he wants to show mercy to, and he's very clear on that in the Old and the New Testament, that he can credit righteousness to whomever he wants to. So balancing that with Jesus saying, I'm the only way, the truth, and the life, that's where the semantics of theology people kind of argue one way or the other. So I'm with, if you're sinful, you deserve to go to hell, and that's all of us. Can God choose to save you in that? Absolutely. So if I am not of the mental capacity to even understand that and come to the conclusion of hearing the gospel and having my response, I think God can do what he wants with that. And his desire is for everyone to come to the knowledge of him and be saved. So that's a tough one. I don't really know because I'm not God. I like to think that he saves those people because he can. If he does or not, I don't know. He also creates everyone with a purpose. So that's a tough one.
Yeah, it's definitely challenging. I think something for me is, why would God... The question people ask is, why would God choose someone over another person? Why doesn't God save everybody? And God can do, as you're saying, like, he can do what he wants. He's God,
Yeah.
so...
Yeah. I mean, I'm of the mind that God's not picking and choosing who to save, that there is a human response required. But then, what if somebody's incapable of doing that? What happens then? I don't know. Bible doesn't really have a clear spelled out in that situation. other than, like I said, he can credit righteousness to whoever he wants to. So it's a faith thing. I don't know what's going on in that person's heart.
Yeah, definitely. Well, with that being said, if God is so loving, why doesn't he save everybody?
Yeah. The basic premise there is the whole idea of, is love if it's forced? So when God created everyone, it was to be in relationship with him. Within that, he presented a choice to Adam and Eve. And so within that choice, he said, here's the situation. I love you. I'm going to hang out with you. Just don't eat of this fruit. And that was the choice, to obey or to not obey. And unfortunately, Adam and Eve didn't obey. And that put us in a situation of, now we're not right with God. And in his love and in his kindness, he created a way to be back in right relationship with him again. He didn't have to do any of that. Automatically, we deserve hell. So the fact that in his grace, he created a way for us to be saved and redeemed, like, we tend to be entitled and feel like we deserve to be saved. What we deserve is to die. So, God in his goodness to create a redemptive path, we miss that in our own sinful entitlement a lot of times.
Definitely. And, something that I've always thought of is, if God didn't send people to hell, is he, the love he shows isn't really glorifying to him, because if he didn't save people from that, if people never had that destination, no one would have even the opportunity to show their love towards God, because they have nothing to love, because it's already given to them. And a point that I always say is, if we automatically were going to heaven, no one would want to follow God in the first place. We have no desire to, so we could go do whatever we want. We could go sin and have no consequences for our actions.
What's challenging for us in our humanity to understand is the three facets of God that make sense but don't make sense, and that's his holiness, his justice, and his love. So God, in his love, would want everyone to be in right relationship with him, but at the same time, there's a discipline part to love. I have an 11-year-old, and I love her, so I discipline her. I set parameters of how she should behave and how to obey and what's right, what's wrong. I'm instilling all that into her. And there's consequences when she doesn't do that, because I love her. Within that, his holiness, he can't be around sin. His justice demands punishment for that sin. And so God has to punish sin. He didn't have to create a redemptive path, but he did, because he loves. And so that's the balance between those three things, but we don't always see it from his perspective.
Yeah, that's good. Well, on to the topic of good.
Yeah.
People often say, I'm a good person, I give money to the poor, I don't cuss, I don't murder people, I generally do good things. I think my good outweighs the bad. Am I going to heaven?
Yeah. No. No, the Bible's really clear on that no one is good, that there is not one righteous, is what Paul would say in Romans. And the trap that is in that statement of, but I'm a good person, I should go to heaven, what I'm really doing is, it's in my self-justification, I'm comparing myself to someone who's worse than me. It's not that I'm good at all, it's that you're worse than I am. But that doesn't make me good, because God's standard is perfection, and we're all short of that. And so my best attempt as good still falls short of the standard of salvation, which is why we need Christ.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, the analogy I've heard before is, you have a glass of water, you put a drop of poison in it or a bunch of poison in it, the water's still poisoned. Yeah. All right, so we're both Christians. We both believe Jesus came and died on the cross for our sins and rose again. Well, how do you know you're right? How do you know Islam's not right or Hinduism's not right? How do you know our religion is the right religion?
So the fundamental difference between Christianity and every other religion in the world is this idea that in Christianity, God himself came down to earth, lived a human experience, lived a perfect life to meet his own standard for redemption, died, rose again, which is really important, because if Jesus didn't rise again, then his sacrifice only counts for one person. But because he came back, it's an eternal sacrifice now. But that path to redemption was started and finished by God himself. Every other world religion, it's a pattern of what do I have to do to be saved. So in Hinduism, you've got your enlightened path, that's Buddhism. You've got your 7 pillars in Islam. In Hinduism, it's the idea of dying with good karma. Every religion, they have their path that I as a human am responsible to fulfill in order to attain salvation. Now that's a ton of pressure. Like if I do something wrong, if I mess up, I don't want to be accountable for my own eternity. The fact that Jesus accomplished that on my behalf, and I just have to accept that gift, and now walk in gratitude and thanks, that turns every other religion on its ear, because Christianity is the only one where God did it. You just have to accept that, versus I have to do all these other things in every other religion. So for me, that's a fundamental difference that you can't escape. Christianity is the only one that is set up that way. It's a faith-based rather than an action-based. So Christianity in and of itself, it's a relationship, not a religion, which is what makes it different.
Yeah, in Islam, for example, like during Ramadan, you were speaking about how hard it would be to like follow those religions. Well, Ramadan, they fast the entire day for a month. When the sun's out, they can't eat or drink water. And if I'm being real with myself, there is absolutely no way I could do that. And that's what their religion requires of them. And if they mess up for one day, if they mess up one time, they're supposed to do it for 60 more days.
And the sad thing is you have people who are filled with faith that this is the right thing, and they're going to devote themselves to that, when the reality is you can trace those world religions to an origin of a human being that had some kind of experience that then they started their religion. The Bible starts at the beginning of time with the creation of everything. There is no, account other than the Bible for the beginning of time. You can trace where Buddhism came from. You can trace where Hinduism came from. And scholars are going to argue, well, the Bible appeared at such a time. But Moses goes beyond when he started writing. He's backtracking. And so Christianity and Judaism, really, they're the only ones that do that.
So there's people that have lived in the jungle, have lived in Africa. There's people that may live their entire life without hearing who Jesus is at all. They never had the opportunity of hearing the gospel. What happens to them?
Yeah. So Paul in Romans 1, he would talk through the idea that looking around at the world, we know that God exists. He's written it in our hearts. His attributes are there in all of creation. So when it comes to, I didn't hear specifically the gospel of Jesus Christ, can I be saved? And that's one of those, I'm not a theologian, I'm not a trained scholar. In my understanding of the word, where I go is, again, God can credit righteousness to who he wants to. And so if I've got this moral compass written into my heart that God put there, then I'm doing my best to follow, acknowledging that there's something out there greater than myself, and I die under that context. Can God save me? Yes. Will he? I don't know. That's where I'm not God. I know God's looking at the heart of that person. So that's one of those, I don't know. I think so, my personal opinion, but I'm also not God. So that person deserves hell, being born into sin. That doesn't mean that God can't credit their life as righteous.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I know when I've looked around the world and looked at nature and I'm just blown away, I'm like, there's, and this is my personal belief, but I mean, like, there's no way this has happened by chance, and all those types of things. And even with the inward morality, it's everyone, you can see that in everyone. Everyone has some kind of compelling inside of them to do good or evil. Okay, so my next question for you is, Noah's Ark, the Bible says, that everyone was doing what was good in their own minds, and God flooded the earth, and only Noah and his family survived because they built the ark. Did everyone outside of Noah and his family go to hell?
Yeah, so when God hit the reset button on earth, it was because in our sin we had traveled so far from Him that there was no opportunity for redemption outside of Noah, who, in that act of obediently building the ark, that was his step of faith, and that's what saved him. So if the earth hadn't been so sinful, God doesn't destroy it. So are those people in hell? Yeah, that's why they died. Noah was saved because God looked at his heart and said, this is a guy I can work with. Outside of that, the rest of humanity, that was the reset button.
Something that challenges me, is me being a Christian. I believe, me following Jesus wholeheartedly, I'm going to heaven. But I see a lot of people around me that are going to hell, and, I could share the gospel with them, but they may not accept that. You may come across a cancer patient, you go share the gospel with them, they don't want to accept it, and, you believe they go to hell, and that's something that's, challenging for us. And to realize how many people in history, the billions of people that are going to hell, it's challenging, and to think even that the possibility of God hitting the reset button and only knowing his family potentially might have been saved out of that whole situation is pretty dang crazy. So, why do you think the church and the LGBT community are so against each other?
Yeah, so that's a good question. For whatever reason, a lot of the church community has come up with this idea that some sins are worse than others, and so for whatever reason, homosexuality is that's the big one that there's no coming back from, and so that community feels a lot of condemnation, and because it's a lifestyle. There's obviously immediate defensive pushback whenever the church comes, that's a sin. If I'm being told that the way I'm living my life is completely wrong, of course I'm going to get defensive about that. The reality is homosexuality isn't any different from lying, from being a drunk, from whatever addictions that the church welcomes with open arms to rehabilitate and love. But we look at homosexual and we go, well, you've made that choice, and so we condemn you instead. When the reality is there's so much more going on in that person's state. There's iniquity behind that. There's a struggle that many of us don't understand. And so for whatever reason, the church has drawn the line, not all churches, but a lot of Christians have drawn a line in the sand around that particular sin. So they're here.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely, no different. Lying and homosexuality, same thing, same weight. No, one is not more significant than the other.
Same eternal consequence.
Yep, same eternal consequence.
That community is in more need of love and acceptance from the Christian community than I think anyone knows. I feel like if Jesus were to come to the earth today, he'd be hanging out with a lot of homosexuals, talking them through life and trying to love them.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Make sure to be active in the conversation. There's a comment section below. Be active. Give your answers to the questions that are coming across. Maybe you have a complaint about how Christians treat people. Maybe you think God should send everyone to heaven. Make sure to give me your opinion. I would love to respond to it.